I'm Tyler, here with Nick. And today we're going to be talking about biopolitics and biopower, coined by Michel Foucault in one of his lectures in about 1975. A next phase of technologies of power following disciplinary power. In this video, we'll be describing exactly what biopower and biopolitics are, how they govern life, how they govern populations, and exactly how it's different from disciplinary power. What we should do is give a brief description of disciplinary power, and we'll get into exactly how biopower is different. What is disciplinary power, and how does it lead into biopower, biopolitics?
So for Foucault, disciplinary power was the power that institutions hold to shape individuals and to discipline the bodies of people. So when we think about disciplinary institutions, the ones that tend to come up are mental institutions, prisons, schools, army barracks, institutions that are made to shape our bodies to conform to the power regimes of institutions. And Foucault sort of charts the development of these disciplinary institutions and how they are used to regulate society as it sort of develops in early capitalism. A lot of his early work is really focused on disciplinary power.
I think it's important to mention in disciplinary power certain fundamental concepts that will carry over to biopolitics, like technologies of power. And Nick was describing various technologies of power that are focused on the body, like military training, prisons, or panopticon. These tools for controlling and disciplining the body. Also, discourses of knowledge is also something that we'll probably be discussing with biopower and biopolitics. With these technologies of power and these regimes of control come different categories of knowledge, of identity, of categorizing who you are in society, and defining exactly what is normal. That's definitely going to be important when it comes to biopower.
Yeah, and I think one thing that's really important to add is that all this new knowledge is generated about the people that are within them. And that knowledge is then used by the powerful to reproduce their power. So thinking about criminal records as like a relatively new phenomena of disciplinary power, or grades, or all these regimes of checking and ensuring the institution of normality.
Foucault, with biopolitics, he says specifically, biopolitics is a new technology of power that exists at a different level, on a different scale, and makes use of very different instruments. So let's get into some of those instruments and, maybe even a timeline. Disciplinary power comes into effect, around probably the late 1700s, the 1800s, especially when urbanization was happening and capital property was being implemented, and people needed to be controlled for the factory or as a workforce. I don't know, when would you place biopower, biopolitics as a new set of technologies, as Foucault is describing?
When talking about biopower and sort of when it comes about, I think like disciplinary societies, it is sort of developing alongside capitalism. And so as capitalism is happening, as people are being proletarianized, their labor is increasingly being done not for sort of subsistence and taxation purposes, but is being done for the market, that we see new regimes of control popping up in order to discipline this new labor force and to produce a society and a population that can produce more efficiently and more productively. And so a lot of these innovations develop alongside capitalism. And I think the important thing to stress with biopower as opposed to disciplinary, biopower zooms out and biopolitics zooms out and focuses on the population as a political problem and on the management of populations as part of the field of politics. And I think one of the things that is sort of taken for granted now, that this is a part of politics, that part of politics is managing the health and the life of a population. But this was not always the case. Before, politics was about, the monopoly on violence, the institution of the law. Political power was not about providing schools and hospitals and sort of population services. This need to more tightly control and manage populations as a political problem.
And yeah, like you were saying, I think it's also clarifying to contrast it to past feudal societies, for example. How were they not engaging in biopowers? Foucault mentions a lot about how death in feudal times was just a permanent part of life, just a perpetual part of life. Like plagues, for example, could not be controlled, maintained, or regulated. You just die sometimes, and there was really nothing you could do, and the state really had no control over your life. They could take your life, but they certainly couldn't prevent you from dying necessarily. With the institution of biopower, a new method came about to, again, administer life. The idea of a population itself is a biopolitical term. Population is really only something that became discussed in around the 1800s. Also, this is a good time to give a little bit of nuance to biopower and to biopolitics. I think you and I both agree that biopolitics is not necessarily simply a product of capitalism. It is more a product of increasing complexity. But biopower, biopolitics in a vacuum is really just about administering life. Capitalism infuses biopolitics with this idea or this conception, this assumption that life is the same thing as productivity. To be alive is to be productive, and to be productive is to be alive.
Yeah, and I think that biopolitics and biopower is just like power and politics themselves, can be used in a variety of ways. It's reductionist to say that biopolitics is purely bad, although some of the worst things that have ever been done have been done on biopolitical levels. So thinking about like genocide, enslavement, colonization.
The biopower is a highly effective tool set for, again, giving life to people, but also taking it away in certain cases. So this quote is from Foucault. Wars are no longer waged in the name of a sovereign who must be defended. They are waged on the behalf of the existence of everyone. Entire populations are mobilized for the purposes of wholesale slaughter in the name of life necessity. Massacres have become vital. Vital in the sense of like a vital life force, that massacring is under biopolitics and capitalism becomes synonymous with giving life somehow. And I think that's an interesting concept. Biopower has an interesting history. In the early 1900s, biopower was actually already a term coined by very popular eugenicists. And Foucault, I'm not sure if he was aware of this use of the term, but there seems to be, with the control of life and the introduction of life and populations into politics, there seems to be an easy slippage into eugenics, into wholesale slaughter, massacre.
I think Foucault is acutely aware of the eugenicist and racist usages of the word biopower. That biopower, as it developed alongside capitalism, developed in a very racist way, in a way that conceptualized populations on the basis of these socially constructed identities that were produced based on skin color, on country of origin, that divided the population into superior and inferior races to be managed as populations. And so biopower, as it was presented in popular discourse, was talked about through race relations. How do we manage this population of blacks or indigenous or Asians? How do we keep our society clean from their influence? And so we see this in attempts to manage populations through things like Jim Crow segregation or apartheid in South Africa or slavery as a means to control and subjugate a population and to manage their labor. And I think in the most extreme examples, Nazism and the Holocaust and the extermination of whole populations, and to justify the eradication of populations on the basis of protecting the German people and the German population and the Aryan racial group.
I mean, if we're sticking with Nazi Germany, they were protecting the population from vermin or from some sort of disease or from some sort of infection. That this othering of part of the population, Jewish folk or Romanis, defined as a threat to the health of the population. So I think that's a clear demonstration of biopolitics being used or being employed, not just in terms of like practical use, but also in the creation of different knowledges of different identities and categories.
I think one thing that I would add is that we could also see this playing out with how the U.S. managed Native American populations and the deliberate attempts to eradicate Native populations in order to create land and make land available for settlement. Settler colonialism is a biopolitical project, the project of taking one population from a land and separating it from an environment and replacing it with a different population. And this is something that, obviously sort of is central to U.S. political history. The extermination of indigenous populations, the theft of native land. And it's something that we still see today in other settler colonies like Israel, where the Israeli population is prioritized, is defended as a population at the cost of expropriating the land and taking the land and destroying the quality of life of the Palestinian people. I think if I was to close out with something, it would be that biopower and biopolitics is not inherently bad, although it has been used to do some of the worst things that have ever been done in human history. We on the left must seize the means of biopower to reproduce the sorts of societies that we want. And in the past, the left has done this, but through the creation of public health institutions, making accessible of the institutions that can reproduce life, the regulation of food and food safety, that a lot of the things that are really important to us to ensuring a quality of life for people and for populations are a part of biopower. Biopower is not bad. We just need to get control of it and take control from the racists, from the capitalists, from those who seek to use their control of populations and their management of populations to destroy, to enrich themselves, and to degrade the environment.
Imagine a leftist biopolitics and an expansion of the idea of what life is and what life needs to exist. Various kinds of public spaces, public showers, public gyms, housing, administering of life outside these ideas of production. There's lots of vectors at play, community and having a life of dignity.
Accessibility. Who has access to good life and to good quality, things, and who has access to, good food and good water and good health care, and how can we expand those things and not, constrict them for an elite, I think would be a leftist biopolitical project.
We'll leave it there. If you like this video, if you're looking for more, feel free to check out our channel or drop a suggestion as to what concept you'd like for us to cover next. If you have nothing else to add, Nick, we'll sign off.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.